So I just want to go over a couple things before I introduce the presenters. Blomquist Hill is your guys' counseling service. So you have access to free counseling that's confidential. So it's completely HIPAA compliant. We partner with your organizations so that you guys and your families can see a counselor at no cost. They'll get a report every quarter that says, I don't know, 20 employees use the benefit, but they don't see who came, what was talked about, nothing. So you don't have to worry about anyone knowing that you're going to counseling if you care. So it's pretty cool. And then another benefit with Blomquist Hill is we partner with Peak Financial to offer you guys a free consultation. So Peak is a really great financial company that we partner with that you guys have access to for a 30-minute consultation. Dave is actually presenting from Peak Financial today, and then he's going to turn it over to Eric from Allianz, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And they're going to go over some stuff with you, but I'll let them talk more about what they do and what that you can access through Blomquist Hill. And then once you go past that consultation, what that looks like. But just know you have these benefits, and these gentlemen are great, and they're gonna really help you guys out today. So if you want to work with them after this whole presentation, or you have questions, you can certainly reach out to them. I'll include Dave's email when I send out the recording of this, and his phone number and their website, so you guys can access that. So just watch for that. And I guess I should mention that I am recording this, so you will receive an email with this recording. So, okay, I think I'm going to pass it over to Dave and let him start, and then kind of let them do their thing.
Heather, I'm very impressed with the house full of kids. You pulled that off wonderfully.
Thanks. No screaming 2-year-olds.
Good job. Great job. And thanks to you all for being here today. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's income planning webinar during uncertain times. So I was looking at the Wall Street Journal this morning, and I learned that nearly 3 million folks sought jobless benefits this week. So jobless aid has subsided a little bit since the initial layoff surge, but it's still at very high historical levels. So meanwhile, ranks of workers drawing on unemployment continues to remain pretty high as states are trying to figure out how to process all these applications. So in the week ending May 2nd, there were about 22.8 million folks here in America that were receiving unemployment benefits, and that was up from 22.4 last week. What really matters to us, though, here at Peak, and I know at Blomquist Hill, is how is this news affecting you and the people that you love? Some of you on the webinar today, I hope, remain fully employed. And I know some may be receiving the same income that you were just a couple of months ago, but some may not. Others may have been laid off, and there may even be some business owners that are trying to figure this all out. One group of people we've found that are experiencing a lot of pressure right now are those folks that are approaching retirement. Can you still retire? Should you? What's your probability of success if you go from a regular paycheck to figuring out how to live off of Social Security, or what you've prepared in your savings and retirement plans all these years? So lots to talk about. To be clear, my name is David Pearson. I'm a registered representative of a firm called Cetera Advisor Networks. I'm also a regional director of Cetera Advisor Networks and a vice president of something called Peak Financial Network Solutions. I'm right here in Murray, not far from the Fashion Place Mall, not far from Blomquist Hill's main offices. But I'm also something called a CFP, or Certified Financial Planner. And all that means is that we're here to help Blomquist Hill clients like you as another resource for questions regarding retirement, investment, tax, insurance, and general financial topics. And today is more about general financial topics, since we're discussing COVID-19 and some of the different challenges that are unique to this particular time. We have over 30 advisors located in a variety of locations in Utah and Idaho and Nevada and California. So I'm not sure if we have folks from those locations that are calling in today, but we have folks all over the place, and certainly Heather will make my contact information available. But I want to just begin with a few thoughts on 2 recent acts that have been passed before we get to our feature speaker. And Eric's really a dynamic fellow. You guys are going to enjoy this. But and I'm coming in talking about two tax law changes, which are pretty boring topics, but I think they're important. The first was big news in January and February, and it's called the Secure Act. Now, it came into law on Friday, December 20th, and it was a big change, a very dynamic change to retirement legislation, more so than anything since 2006. But I'm going to be really brief about it because I don't know exactly what our audience looks like in terms of age demographics. So bear with me for 1 second. Number one, required minimum distributions. So if you participate in an IRA or a 401k and you reach age 70 and a half, up till now, you've had to start taking money out each year. It's called an RMD or a required distribution. Well, because of the Secure Act, you don't have to do that until age 72 now. So anybody born after July 1, 1949, you can wait until you're age 72 for distributions. So that might help retirement money last a little longer. You can also contribute to your traditional IRA after age 70 and a half. That didn't used to be the case. And you have to have what's called not provisional income, but earned income. So something with a W-2 or a 1099, and then you can make contributions to your IRA, even though you're older than age 70 and a half. Probably the most significant change, and I don't know if this affects anyone, but inherited retirement accounts are different now. Upon the death of an account owner of an IRA or 401k, distributions to a non-spousal individual must be made within 10 years. It used to be that you could stretch your distributions over your entire life, but that's changed now and you have to take them out over 10 years. Okay, so that's inherited retirement accounts. Now I'm going to give you a little whiplash from those that are over age 70 and a half all the way down to those that are contemplating having children for a moment. This new act, the Secure Act, has birth expenses and adoption expense provisions in it. So it allows for penalty-free withdrawals from retirement plans for birth or adoption up to $5,000, which would apply to each parent, including those who have adopted children. So technically, a couple could take out up to $10,000 from their retirement savings as long as they both have separate accounts without penalties. You may recall that you normally have a 10% penalty for a pre-59 and a half distribution. So that's it for the Secure Act. I mentioned there were two big acts that came into play. One was the Secure Act. The other is this thing called the CARES Act. The CARES Act is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and it includes all kinds of expansions for small business lending, unemployment insurance, tax relief to individuals like you, and maybe some employers that have joined with us today, some stabilization funds and emergency appropriations aimed at combating COVID-19, both the healthcare side of things and the economic crisis. So it does have some changes to both defined benefit and defined contribution plans. So for those of you who have a pension plan, there may be some changes, but I'm going to just focus a few remarks on defined contribution plans because most of us don't have pensions anymore. Most of us have a 401k or a 403b or something like that. So it includes some withdrawal and loan changes that can be helpful for participants affected by the crisis who need access to cash. So who qualifies to maybe benefit from this? Well, certainly anybody who's been diagnosed with coronavirus, that is a qualified participant in a plan, or their spouse, or somebody who has a spouse or a dependent, but also any participant experiencing adverse financial consequences as a result of being quarantined or furloughed or laid off or having fewer hours or being unable to open the doors of your business or attend work because of childcare. And these are, of course, all virus-related provisions. So that's a big deal. Now, what is the benefit? Well, it temporarily waives the withholding requirements and the existing 10% penalty for early withdrawals. So for those of us that are below age 59 and a half, if we want to take money out of our IRA or 401k up till now, we've had to pay a 10% penalty to access our money, which is a real challenge sometimes. If we were taking money directly from a 401k, we've had to have money withheld automatically for income taxes. And what this is telling us is this temporarily waives withholding requirements and the existing 10% penalty for early withdrawals. Another thing, limits were half of your vested balance in your plan up to $50,000. And now limits are up to $100,000 of your vested balance. But you have to make the distributions after January 1, 2020 and before December 31st to be eligible. There are some different repayment provisions. It could be paid back over 3 years if you want to put your money back into the plan. And there are some provisions on income taxes, which can be paid over 3 years rather than any 1 year, which is a change. So anyway, that's a big deal. One of the last things I'm going to mention is required minimum distributions for 2020. So we've talked about those over 70. We've talked about those that may be having kids. We've talked a little bit about those that are in between that may have balances in their plans. But in 2020, the CARES Act temporarily waives required minimum distributions for calendar year 2020. So if you were feeling pressure that you needed to take money out this year, there's a little bit of relief. With that, you need to know that for the past 16 years, I've had the pleasure of working with Eric Motzkus. Eric's the retirement consultant and regional vice president of Allianz Life Financial Services. He holds the CRPC designation. He's a very sharp fellow. And more important than that, he's helped me and our firm and many of the folks in our firm with the clients we serve with critical retirement challenges for individuals and families trying to become and remain more financially independent. So with that, Eric, I'd like to turn the time over to you to discuss today's topic, which is income planning in uncertain times.
Thanks, Dave, for the nice introduction. Happy to be here. In light of what we're going through right now, this presentation, the target market really is people within 10 years of retiring, but we're going to bring in, so that would be like 55 to 65, kind of our prime target market. But we're going to bring in some strategies as well for those of you in your, that are in your 20s or 30s or 40s, in just being prepared, how to get prepared for something like this in the future. So the presentation, the value of income planning, I put this together myself. My company wanted me to build out a presentation and make the analogy of saving for retirement and climbing Mount Everest. And the reason for that is sometimes when you're, in your 20s or you're in your 30s and the thought of like saving up an enormous amount of money so that you can actually retire, it can seem like an impossible task. Similarly, when you think about climbing Everest, what all goes in or is involved in actually climbing Everest, it takes an enormous amount of training. It's expensive. It's right now, if you want to climb Everest and you want to go the cheap route and still have an English speaking guide, it's about $85,000. And I don't know that I would recommend going the cheap route, but it's a lot of money, takes a lot of time. It's very difficult. Very similarly, if you're 25 and you're, making 15, 20 bucks an hour, the idea of saving $1 million for retirement can seem almost impossible. It can be overwhelming. But believe it or not, I see a lot of people on the back end of this. So I've helped thousands of people retire over the last 20 years. And if you're disciplined and you're saving 10% every month, you'd be surprised at how many people achieve this goal. And what I mean by that when I say being disciplined is maybe instead of going out and buying that Audi A4, you get a used Toyota Camry. And instead of getting, the big, flat screen TV that you want, you get a little smaller TV. And maybe you don't splurge in certain areas so that you can consistently contribute 10% of your money into your retirement. By doing those things over time, 10, 20, 15, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, there's a lot of people who get to the point where they actually can retire. But here's the interesting thing about retiring and climbing Everest. Getting to the top of Everest, that's just the beginning. The more difficult journey is coming down from Everest. And similarly, saving retirement, as hard as that may sound, to save all that money, that's the easy part. Where it gets challenging and difficult is retiring, ending that paycheck that you've been getting your whole life, and then having to create your own paycheck and have it last for the rest of your life. That's most people don't know that when you're climbing Everest, the most difficult journey is on the descent. In fact, there's about 350 people who have died in that climb of Everest. And there's some interesting facts when you study this. As I started looking into this, there's at the very top of Everest, or right off the top, if you actually make this journey and you're lucky enough to get to the top and make it to the bottom, you are going to see hundreds of bodies on that trail of people who weren't able to make it. And because it's at such a high altitude, they're not able to bring those bodies down. Where most of those bodies are congregated are on the descent from just off of the top, above 26,000 meters, right off the top. That's because that's where this journey is the most treacherous. Very similarly, when you retire, that first 5 years of retirement is the most dangerous time, and you need to be prepared for that. So that's why, we put this presentation together we wanted to help people learn a process that can help you prepare and put things into place so that you don't have to worry about, what happens if the market goes down, or what if something happens right before I retire? If you follow the steps in this process, you'll be able to retire when you want to retire and do it in a way where you don't have all this anxiety. Right now, everybody's stressed out. There's a lot of people who've lost jobs. What do I do to replace my income? But I would argue the people that are most fearful are the ones who don't have time on their side anymore. And what I mean by that is, if I'm 35 and I lost my job, yeah, it's going to be tough finding a new job, but this too shall pass. You still have 20, 30 years to save, right? If you're 25, if you're 35, even if you're 45, even in your early 50s, you still have time. If I'm in my late 50s, or if I'm 60 and I just lost my job and the market went down 30% and I saw my life savings go down by 30% and I don't have time on my side anymore, that's where this gets scary. And so that's where we put this presentation together, was to really help those folks understand the steps they need to do to put into place a plan so that they don't have to worry about these things and they can retire with confidence. So a couple of things real quick, I just want to make sure you understand. In saving for retirement, so from the age of 25 to 55, there's really only one thing you need to worry about. There's only one risk that you face, and it's only one thing that can derail your retirement, and that's not saving. Okay, so think about this. Now, a lot of things could cause you to not save: losing a job, getting sick, disability, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if you save 10% every month of your income for 30 years, there's a good chance you're going to reach your goal. What gets scary is when you get to 55, something changes. So from 25 to 55, all you have to worry about is saving money. Once you get to 55, a new risk pops up, and it's called market volatility. Now, you didn't have to worry about that from 25 to 55. It doesn't matter what the market is. If you're saving money, market volatility doesn't really affect you as much as when you're right before you retire. If all of a sudden the market drops 50%, now you're not retired. So when you get within 10 years of retirement, the game changes. You can't just play offense anymore. You have to start playing defense. I think we all probably know somebody who was going to retire in '08 who maybe had to put retirement off 5 years. Or we may know people today who are going to retire this year, who are now having to reconsider, like, can I retire? Do I need to put retirement off 3 to 5 years? Market volatility is a huge risk. Then when you actually retire and turn 65, or in other words, you summit Everest and you get to the top and you plant your American flag or whatever, your celebration at the top, that's when the journey just begins. That's when you start seeing all these other risks that helped you during accumulation hurt you in distribution. So for example, these are when you turn 65 and actually start pulling money out of your retirement accounts, you have to worry about longevity. What if I live too long? What if my money doesn't last? Rising healthcare costs, market volatility, inflation, sequence of return, all market timing, declining, cognitive abilities. There's all these different things, interest rate environment. All these things become obstacles that you've got to prepare for and plan for and be ready for that don't affect you during accumulation. So that distribution phase or coming down the Everest is much more difficult than people are aware. So I'm going to talk about some of these obstacles and then go through a process that you can use to avoid them. So we're going to talk about, the big four. So longevity, we missed a slide here.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
We actually had a question come in.
Okay.
So it says, a financial planner recently told me that you should have 2.5 million saved per couple for retirement because of the rising cost of healthcare. You mentioned only needing 1 million. Can you explain your number since there's quite a big difference between the two? Sure.
That's a great question. And I try not to freak people out. Sometimes you say $1 million and to some 45 and has $200 in the retirement savings. That is a scary thought. With where interest rates are at, that $2.5 million number is probably where a 25-year-old today needs to be. But the reality is, and here's where they mean by that. You can safely take off a portfolio right now around 4%. Now with the interest rate environment we're in, they're saying now it's closer to 3%. So what's 3% of $2.5 million? It's roughly, what is that? That's 30,000 per million. And so you're $75,000. So $75,000, but what you need to take into account is you're going to have Social Security. So, 75 on top of your Social Security, that's going to give you around $110,000, $120,000 income. The reality is most people in Utah, for example, don't have $2.5 million saved. I would say the average person I see on a daily basis has between $500,000 and $750,000 saved. So, and that's it, in their 60s getting ready to retire. So again, the more you save, the more you can craft your retirement, or you can design it to be exactly what you want it to be. But for the average American who has $500,000 saved, or not even that, $400,000 saved, I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, I can't retire, because the reality is you have Social Security, and then you have the income from your retirement savings plus Social Security to kind of give you that retirement. And then hopefully when you're retired at 60, that house is paid off. You don't have those debts that you had in your 30s and 40s. So Great question. And when we get more into the specifics, I'll come back to that and give you real life examples of what kind of income you could expect with $2.5 million versus $500,000 in retirement that you could safely pull. I'm going to move on from there unless you have an additional question. But the first risk one of the biggest risks that compounds all other risks is longevity. You know, retirement 30 years ago was very different. Most of we call them that age demographic, we call the seasoned citizens. Most of them, when they retired, like my dad, for example, he worked for a telephone company his whole life, and they gave him a pension. And so when he retired, he didn't have to plan. He had his Social Security plus his pension. Oh, and they gave him healthcare benefits. As long as he worked there 30 years, he was taken care of. Things have radically changed. The average retiree today has had 5 or 6 different jobs. He has 5 or 6 different retirement accounts from those jobs. He doesn't have a pension. He didn't retire because he wanted to. He retired because he had to. And now he's got to take all those different retirement accounts and create a paycheck that's going to last not 15 or 20 years, which was the life expectancy 30 years ago in retirement, but 25 or 30 years. So baby boomers today are planning for a retirement that will be longer than what they saved for retirement. So longevity is the biggest challenge in retirement. And so just to look at some statistics here, you look at the last 50 years, what's happened with male and female life expectancy. In just 50 years, the average male life expectancy has gone from 67 to 77. Female's gone from 75 to 82. But what gets interesting is when you start looking at probability of people living to 80 or 90 years old, which was not seen very often 30, 40 years ago. Well, today, if a male has a 72% chance he's going to live to 80, a female has a 78% chance. A married couple, a 65-year-old married couple, there's a 94% chance one of them is going to make it to 90. Now you go out to 90, those numbers for male and female are 32, 42%. But here's the one that's the most startling. A married 65-year-old couple has a 61% chance one of them is going to make it to 90. Just think about that for a minute. If you retire in your early 60s, that's 28 years that you've got to create a paycheck. And with that sort of probability, you have to plan for that. So, unfortunately, a lot of people I talk to, their plan for when they run out of money is to die. You'll talk to people and they say, well, when I run out of money, I'll just die. It doesn't exactly work that way. So for as long as man has been on earth, the biggest fear has always been death. When you take a survey of retirees or people in their early 60s, they're not afraid of dying anymore. Their number one fear is running out of money and having to move in with their kids. That has replaced death as the number one fear for retirees. So longevity is a huge problem that you need to take into consideration when doing your planning. Now, market volatility we talked about earlier, I want to expand on that. Market volatility is one risk. Sequence of returns is another. Most people don't know what sequence of returns means, and it's one of the biggest risks that will derail most retirement plans. And the scary thing about sequence of return risk is it's out of your control. Okay, so what I mean by that is you can do everything right. You can save 10% of your income every year. You can live frugally. You do everything right. And then when you retire, in the year that you retire, is the market going to be up or down? If we were in a room, I'd pull out a quarter and I'd flip it and I'd ask you to choose head or tails. And if it was heads, the market's up. If it's tails, the market's down. And if it's down, if it's up, you're going to have a great retirement, leave a large sum of money to your kids. If it's tails, you're going to run out of money early and move in with your kids. So it's like, how does that make you feel to know that's totally out of your control? Well, that's what sequence of return risk does. And I want you to know how to plan for it. So market volatility. What is market volatility risk? Well, we're going through it right now. Look at your retirement accounts. You know, it's great when your retirement accounts are going up every year, like the last 10 years. But what happens when in 2 weeks, it goes down 30%? Well, if this is scary for you in accumulation, it shouldn't be, because the reality is if you're saving when the market goes down, you're averaging it at a lower cost. And when the market comes back up, you're actually going to make more money. And if we look at from the market from 08 through 2017, we look there, those are the returns right in front of you. The average was 8.5%. Well, what if we change those around? What if we arranged those from low to high and then did the math, calculated what was my average return? Well, it's 8.5. It doesn't affect it. The sequence of those returns in accumulation do not affect your average return. What if we go from high to low and we calculate the average return? Again, 8.5%. So what this demonstrates is while you're saving for retirement, the sequence of your returns don't matter. If you just keep saving, and when the market goes down, you're buying shares at a lower cost. When the market comes up, you make more money. At the end of the day, during accumulation, market volatility doesn't matter. What about when you get into retirement and start pulling your money, though? Okay, so take a look at this. We're going to take a look at a portfolio of $1 million. We're going to assume an average return of 6%. You're going to take a $50,000 withdrawal annually for income, and we're going to adjust for inflation of 3.5%. Okay, and in this case, we're going to take a look at a market where the market, it's 6% return every year. So 6%, 6%, 6%, just a good, conservative growth in the market. How long does your money last? Well, it lasts about 29 years. Okay. Now we're going to look at, well, what happens if we just start out in a down year? You know what? This is our up year. You know what? They put in a new slide. Okay. Sorry. They put in a new slide for me. So in this assumption, the annual returns start in a big up year. So 27% up, then 9, then 7, then down 15. So we start, remember, like I said earlier, you start in a good year, everything being the same, $50,000 income adjusted for 3.5% inflation. Your money lasted 36 years, okay? Now we're going to look at what if you start in a down market. So we're going to take those same returns and flip them. So instead of starting up, you start in a down 15. So you start this year in retirement, for example. Well, you run out of money in 23 years. That 23 to 36, that's a big difference. That's 13-year gap, okay? So if I go 36 years, remember, I probably leave a big nest egg to my kids. If I run out in 23 years, I'm probably moving in with my kids. And that's what I'm talking about. Sequence of returns, distribution, it's so much more important, the timing of the market. And so you need to be prepared and insure against that. And I'm going to show you again a process for how you can do that. The other big challenge that people don't understand is inflation, and this one is interesting because I'm sure if I asked anybody on this Zoom conference, if I asked you to give me the definition of inflation, you would all tell me that it's things go up in price over time. You all know the definition, but I'm not convinced you all really understand what it means. And so this is the example I like to give, and maybe I can get someone to participate here. In 1965, what did the average wage earner for a family take home for an entire year's earnings? So I want someone to unmute and guess. In 1965, so for the main wage earner for a family, what do you think they took home for an entire year's earnings?
About $3,000.
Marlene understands inflation. Usually I get people throwing out numbers like 16 or 20. The number's $4,400. Think about that. My dad built his first home in Holiday. It was a big home, a 4,000 square foot home on a half acre in Holiday. He built it for $18,000. His mortgage payment was $118 a month, which if you think about, if you take $4,400 annual income, take out your taxes, and then subtract the home mortgage, that was most of his money went to paying his mortgage of $118 a month. Okay. Now, fast forward. My dad is now 80 years old. A few years back when we were doing some income planning, he said, you know what really ticks me off? What, Dad? What ticks you off? He says, my electric bill is now more than my first mortgage. And so think about this for a minute. Take your biggest payment that you make every month, your mortgage payment. And I want you to imagine you're 75 years old and that's your electric bill. And you've got a water bill and a car payment and groceries to buy and healthcare costs. That is inflation. People do not understand. And the biggest mistake I see made in the retirement planning process is people take too much of their money early on, not thinking about keeping their money growing for later on. So people have to prepare for inflation. We know when you look at inflation and you compare it to rising healthcare costs have always gone up 3-4 times overall inflation. And we went through the Obama healthcare experiment. That didn't slow the growth. In fact, if anything, healthcare costs have gone up even faster. So healthcare is an issue that people do not account for. And another problem I see is people forget, those that want to retire early forget that from age 62 or 60 until 65, when you don't have Medicare, you've got to cover your own healthcare out of pocket. And that's another thing people need to plan for and be aware of. The last thing there's a lot of risks, but we're kind of tackling the top 4. The last one, Saturday. What is Saturday? What does that mean? Most people make the faulty assumption that when I retire, I'm going to live off 75% of my income that I live off of today. And let me tell you why that's a problem. If you think about your week before every day became the same day during coronavirus, when did you spend the most money? Well, for most people, it's Saturday. It starts out with your Home Depot trip, a couple $100 and random stuff there. And then you stop by the store and pick something up. And then you're having lunch. And then you're back to Home Depot in the afternoon. And then you're going out to dinner with your spouse or whatever. That's the day of the week that you spend most of your money. Well, here's what happens when you retire. Every day becomes Saturday. So the idea that you're going to spend less, it's just not true. Most people spend more when they actually retire because they have all this time to go out and do the things they want to do. So those are the big 4. Longevity, market volatility, sequence of return, inflation, Saturday. So what can I do to overcome these? And I also want to say, so for the pre-retiree, the 55 or older right now who's nervous, or what about the 45-year-old who's unemployed right now? Or how do I be prepared for this? Well, it starts by taking a real hard look at your financial information. How many of you have actually done a budget analysis? How many of you have ever sat down and filled out a budget analysis and identified what are my annual essential income needs? Or, break that down to monthly. What do I have to have every month to survive? That's the first thing we want to do as we're starting to get ready for retirement is we can't just, I think I need about $5,000 a month. No, we need to know what are your essential needs every month? What are your discretionary needs every month? How are you going to cover that healthcare cost? If you're going to retire early, how are you going to cover those costs until 65? The main reason most people wait until age 65 is that healthcare cost, unless you have COBRA or unless you work for a company that gives you some sort of benefit to get you to age 65, there's a reason most people retire at 65, and that's because they've got to wait until their health care is covered. So in talking about a budget analysis, what you need to do and why you do this is when you're in retirement, you're going to have essential, discretionary, and legacy type needs. Your expenses, your essential expenses, do you want those going like this in retirement? So let me describe a retirement with volatile essential expenses. 2 months ago, a month ago, you're going to Outback and you're going to a movie on a Friday night. Now you're sitting at home having ramen every meal, because the market dropped 30%. We can't go out anymore. We can't do those things. And then we get through this and the market comes back up. Oh, now we can go back out today. Most people don't want a retirement like that. They want to know that, like, hey, my expenses that I have to have, they come steadily every month. So, we want to make sure that our needs, our food, our bills, our insurance, our taxes, those are covered. Okay. Then we want to identify the fun stuff. Okay. How much money am I going to spend eating out and playing golf and visiting grandkids and going on vacation? We want that in a separate category. And then, do I want to leave? What sort of things do I want to do for charity or my children? We want to identify those. And the reason for that is we want guaranteed lifetime income sources covering your essentials. So when you sit down with a financial planner and he asks you to do a budget analysis, this is why. This is a true statistic, and it's kind of scary, but a 65-year-old couple will spend more time planning their excursions on an Alaskan cruise than they will their budget in retirement. Like, if you ask someone to do a budget, analysis for retirement, I don't want to do that. But they'll go and spend hours planning their cruise. When you're getting ready to retire, we've got to identify these. And the reason for that is we want to create the income to cover those from your guaranteed lifetime income sources. And what is everybody's biggest lifetime income source? Your Social Security.
So Eric, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
It's come up on the chat a couple of times. Can we really count on Social Security? Is it something that we should be counting on? Can you just spend a moment on that thought?
Okay, so great question. I'm a huge Social Security critic myself, but here's a couple of things I've learned as I've gone through. I actually teach higher education courses to Social Security, to CPAs, financial advisors. I've had to do a lot of classes on this. And here's what I've learned. If you think the government is going to stop taxing us, then I wouldn't count on Social Security. If we're going to continue to be taxed, there will be a Social Security benefit because the largest voting segmentation of our population is on Social Security. So I'm not worried about Social Security not being there. I'm worried about it changing. So is Social Security going to change? And so, yes, it is going to change. And we don't know when, but here's what I would say to a 55-year-old. If you're within 10 years of retiring, that dollar amount that they promise you on your annual statement, I'm confident that you're going to get that, okay? If you're within 10 years, they're not going to change the rules in the game in the fourth quarter. You've been planning on this. You've been contributing to this. You're one market cycle away from retiring. They're not going to take it away from you. Could they decrease your Social Security increase on that? Yeah, and they have been doing that by claiming there hasn't been inflation for the last decade. Where the change is going to come is the younger generation, me, people my age, or after me. So the millennials. I'm pretty confident that by the time I get to that age, 62, early retirement filing probably isn't going to be an option for me. My 62 will probably be 65. And my 67 might be 70. So I think they will fix Social Security, and they will do it by reducing your inflation adjustment on it and by making you wait longer to take it. So for what it's worth, as far as counting on it, if you make a lot of money, I would not plan on it. If you have the luxury of not planning on it, do it. But I think most people are going to get some form of Social Security.
So thank you for answering that question. The chat room is lighting up. And so I just wanted to go there for a second, if you don't mind, Eric. I don't mean to take you off task, but
no, sure.
I'd love for this to be a conversation, and they're all muted. So one of the questions that came through, yes, Eric, there will always be taxes, but will there be, let's see, there will always be taxes, but will the funds in Social Security always be there?
So
they don't think so. And so is there any money in Social Security, or has that long since been spent?
Yeah, a lot of people think there's like this fund they're contributing to, and then the government's going to give it back to them. We spent that years ago. So we are currently borrowing through what we collect in Social Security today. We could pay 79% of all outstanding balance or benefits all the way to 2069. So if we made no changes through what we collect, we could pay 80% of existing benefits all the way to 2069. By tweaking a few things, like changing my date that I qualify and those that come after me, they can shore up that number. And that's why I say, I think that's how they're going to go about changing Social Security, is by raising. When Social Security was originated in 1934, you had to be 60 to get it. Do you know what the average life expectancy was back in 1934? Like 1 in 49 people actually got Social Security. So you can see that as we've had these advances in technology and healthcare, and longevity's increased, the benefit's the same. And I think we're going to see it go back to, you've got to be older to qualify to get it. But at the same time, they can't pull the rug out from all the people who have contributed for 20, 30 years. So there are questions. I don't want to say, and again, this is politicians handling this, which is even scarier. But for people, if you're at 55 today and you're planning on retirement, I'm confident that you can use Social Security and you can assume that you'll get at least your benefit they promised you. But you're probably not going to get the inflation adjustment on that, you think. And if you're my age or after me, you're probably going to see some sort of reform, meaning that, your full retirement age, I would guess my early and full retirement benefit age is going to go up. Dave, are there any other questions, Dave, specifically?
Oh, there are plenty more, and we'll come back to them. I just wanted to pause for a second and ask, but they're Social Security related. Let's continue on, and then we'll come back and make sure we're covering all the questions that are most important.
Okay. All right. So when we're evaluating our income needs, we got to take a look at what our expenses are, but we also have to take a look at what are my sources of income. And so for the 45-year-old who just got laid off, we kind of go through the same process. We think, okay, man, I'm used to spending $7,000 a month. I don't know how. I just know that like $7,000 just evaporates every month from my family. I don't know what all happens, it's just gone. Well, when we get into a crisis like this, now we might want to do a budget analysis and figure out, well, geez, of that 7,000, I don't know where 4 of that's going, but I mean, I only really need 3 to cover my essential needs. Okay. And so if I'm a 45-year-old's been laid off and I go through this process of identifying my essentials, it's $3,000 a month is what I need. And then I have access to my qualified money, like David mentioned in the beginning. I can access my 401, because I've lost my job, I'm experiencing a hardship because I was furloughed or whatever because of this COVID-19. I qualify to access my retirement funds. So I can take, $18,000 out, not get penalized, and be able to pay the taxes over the next 3 years on that. That'll get me through the next 6 months if I just make sure my essentials are covered. So similarly in retirement, what are my essential needs? What sources do I have? Social Security, my pension, my qualified money like 401k and IRA. I've got to figure those out, make sure that I can meet those expenses with my sources of income. But one process that we go through in the retirement planning process is most people, when they figure out that essential number, it's not completely covered by Social Security. So for example, and I see this on a daily basis, let's say a couple says I need, and one thing I just want to clarify, because when I throw these numbers out, you might be thinking, well, I need way more than that. The reality is when you retire, most people that I see, they've paid off their house. In retirement, it's you don't need to save anymore. You're there, okay? So you don't want to pull out any more than you need. So I would say the average income that I see people pulling, and I don't care if you have, the highest income request I've had in the last 3 years was from an engineer who sold a business for $5 million. He had about $10 million in total assets. He wanted $190,000 a year in income, just to kind of give you some perspective. Even a guy with that sort of asset level, everything's paid off. He doesn't basically he's paying taxes and insurance and groceries. Okay. The reason I'm describing that is people don't live off of $250,000, $300,000 in retirement. They live off of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Most people. And so let's imagine for someone who has a $70,000 income need, of which $50,000 is essential, maybe their Social Security only covers 35 or 40 of that. So they have what's called an income gap. So on their essential expenses that we want to cover with lifetime income, there is a gap. So we want to take a look at our expenses, essential, discretionary, legacy, and then we want to find our sources, lifetime income, Social Security for our essentials. We'll use our other assets, so our IRA and 401k money, to cover our discretionary. So we'll draw on that as needed to cover our discretionary. And then if we have extra, we'll use that for our legacy planning. It's a process that's bulletproof, and it sounds very simple, but the reality is, if you can take the time and sit down and figure out what is my budget annually, break it down then to monthly, and then break it down to essential and discretionary. And then I want to give you hope. So for the people who haven't saved, I can give you a real life example of a 60-year-old that I currently worked with, who had $300,000 in his 401k before this COVID-19. Okay, so 60-year-old who saved $300,000 up to the age of 60, that's now probably worth $200,000, and he's concerned about being able to retire in 7 years. Now, this is this is not a great scenario, but I want to give you hope. The good news is, when we identified his income need, it was about $65,000 a year, and his house will be paid off in 7 years. So there will be no mortgage payment. He's going to need about $65,000 a year. Of that $65,000, 50 of it was essential. Well, between him and his wife, 45, and this isn't uncommon, $45,000 would be his and his wife's Social Security benefit. So of that $50,000 essential need, 85% of it's covered from Social Security. So we had a small gap of about $5,000 that we needed to solve for. So what we could do, and what we did, was we rolled some of his 401k money into a pension-like product that would pay that $5,000 guaranteed for life 7 years from now. Okay, so his $50,000 essential number when he turns 67, will be guaranteed covered by Social Security and his own pension for the rest of his life. And then we had the hard conversation of, why do you only have $300,000 saved at the age of 60? And what was astonishing to me is all of his qualified money were company-made contributions. He wasn't saving. He said, I have 6 kids. I've had to pay for colleges and marriages and this and that. Okay, well, now from 60 to 67, we're going to accelerate your contributions. We're not just going to save 10%. We're going to save 15% of every paycheck. Now that your kids are gone and your marriages and weddings and colleges are paid for, but this is someone who was traveling too much, had a very nice car, living a lifestyle they couldn't afford. And now if they can contribute what we had discussed for the next 7 years, they'll have about $400,000 in investable assets 7 years from now, of which if we take 4%, 3%, 4% off of, plus their Social Security, he can retire pretty comfortably, even in a scenario where he wasn't prepared. So by going through this process of doing a budget analysis, finding out your essential, discretionary, and then start putting those things into place for when you're ready down the road 7 years, even in that scenario, we were able to help that person put a plan together that was bulletproof. Now, if you thought I was going to get on here today and tell you that if you buy some widget, it was going to solve all your problems, that's not the way it works. The reality is you need to sit down with someone like Dave and go through this process. If you do this, I promise you, and you do it in enough time, if you haven't saved well and you want to retire next year, there's nothing we can do. But if you want to retire in 5 to 7 years and you sit down with Dave today and you start putting these things into place, I promise you, you will retire when you want to retire. And Dave can do things to ensure that market volatility and longevity and inflation, those things are protected. Now, this presentation, I didn't get into specifics of how products work, and it's too confusing. I don't want you to be worrying about that. The important thing is that you take the time, go through this process with a financial professional, and that will ensure that you can retire when you want to retire the way you want to retire. So most people don't do planning. I would say in Utah, I know this from statistics I've gotten from credit unions like Mountain America. Like, for example, Mountain America, 70% of their clients at Mountain America do not have a financial planner. So that's, to me, disturbing, and here's why. I recently had a cancer scare, and I thought I was going to have to go in and have my prostate removed. Okay, this is a true story. This was a scary incident. Well, I want you to imagine that you're a family member of mine, okay, and I confide in you, and I tell you that I have this. I actually went through this. I had to choose a doctor, and we were going through, and luckily it ended up not being cancer. I didn't have to do this, but for 2 months I was planning on having my prostate removed. Well, I want you to imagine that you're my brother, and we're having this discussion, and you ask me who I'm going to go to, and I tell you, well, I'm just going to do it myself. I'm just going to take out my own prostate. And you say to me, well, wait a minute here. You're not a doctor. And I say, well, yeah, but I can go on YouTube now, and they have these self-taught. They can just teach you how to do it. Now, you might be thinking, I'm crazy. Okay, like, what is this guy thinking? Your financial planning isn't any less. I mean, when you think about the two most important things, it's your health, and then it's your financial health. If you want to be happy, those are the two most important things. To try to think that you're going to do this all yourself with no help, to me, is as crazy as me wanting to try to do my own surgery. Like, you need the help of a financial professional to take you through this process, because we didn't even get into the products. And you not only do you have to understand the process, but then you have to know how to implement the products to make it all work. So I just highly recommend that you take the time at some point to sit down with a financial professional.